Hey there, welcome back. We've got a deep dive cooked up just for you, and it's all about making websites that people actually enjoy using.
Sounds like a worthy challenge.
Mm.
I'm always up for busting some web design myths.
Now we're gonna bust some myths, all right. We're diving into Don't Make Me Think, the usability classic by Steve Krug. This book has been a go-to for designers for years, and it's still packed with timeless wisdom.
You know, Steve Krug's background, working with giants like Apple and Netscape, really gives him a unique perspective. He's seen it all from brilliant design choices to facepalm-worthy blunders.
Okay, let's unpack what Steve Krug really means by Don't Make Me Think. He kicks off by saying something that just about blew my mind. Ready for this? People don't actually read websites, they scan them.
Yeah, he throws out this idea that we're all kind of like web zombies, just lurching around looking for the quickest way to satisfy our immediate needs.
And he's got the receipts to prove it. He even talks about people who would type entire URLs into the Yahoo search bar, thinking that's how the internet works. It's almost endearing, but it also makes you realize we're not always the most logical creatures online.
And that's why understanding cognitive load is so crucial for good web design. Think of it like this. Every time a user has to stop and think, where do I click? Or what does this mean? It adds to their cognitive load. The more we make them think, the less likely they are to actually find what they need.
So are you saying we should be designing websites for like goldfish? Short attention spans and all?
Not quite goldfish, but
Nah.
you're getting the idea. We need to design for scannability and make every interaction as effortless as possible.
Which brings us to Krug's first law of usability. Don't make me think. He uses this brilliant billboard analogy, saying a good website should be like a well-designed billboard, easy to understand at a glance.
Exactly. You wouldn't expect someone driving down the highway to carefully analyze a cluttered, confusing billboard. They need to get the message instantly. Same goes for your website.
So how do we turn our websites into those clear, compelling billboards? Krug says it all starts with visual hierarchy, those subtle cues that guide the user's eye and make it instantly clear what's most important.
It's kind of like how department stores use big, bold signs to guide you to different sections. Imagine walking into a store where everything is jumbled together with no clear organization. You'd probably walk right back out.
And speaking of things that are instantly recognizable, Krug is a big believer in using web conventions and guilds, those established patterns that users have come to expect, like the shopping cart icon or the search bar in the top right corner.
Conventions reduce cognitive load because
Yeah.
they tap into our existing knowledge of how websites work. It's like speaking a common language.
Krug even gives a shout out to those iconic green street signs in LA, saying they're a perfect example of good design. They're clear, consistent, and you never have to second guess what they mean.
But as Krug points out, there's a fine line between using conventions effectively and falling to the trap of reinventing the wheel.
Yeah.
Sometimes designers get so caught up in being creative that they forget about the basics.
Like that website Krug talks about where the
Uh-huh.
navigation menu was hidden behind a tiny, obscure icon. Talk about making me think. I mean, I'm all for minimalist design, but not when it comes at the expense of usability.
Right? Sometimes those trendy minimalist designs can actually make things harder to use. Clickability needs to be obvious. You don't want users squinting at the screen trying to figure out what they can and can't click on.
Absolutely. And speaking of making things obvious, Krug has this great chapter on mindless choices. He uses this hilarious example of trying to play animal, vegetable, or mineral with a computer to illustrate how simple, clear choices make all the difference.
It's fascinating how that ties into decision fatigue. The more choices we present to users, more mental energy they have to expend. Even if those choices seem helpful on the surface, sometimes limiting options actually leads to a better user experience.
So we're aiming for mindless choices. Is that like the web equivalent of comfort food, something easy to digest, no surprises?
Exactly. We want users to be able to navigate our websites effortlessly without having to stop and ponder every little decision. Think of it like this. If you're designing an online store in Deccan, you have 10 different shipping options. Most users are going to feel overwhelmed. Streamlining those choices down to the most common ones will make the process much smoother.
And then there's Krug's third law of usability. Get rid of half the words on the page, then get rid of half of what's left. Now that might sound brutal, but honestly, so many websites are drowning in what he calls happy talk. All that fluffy, unnecessary text that just adds to the cognitive load.
Krug is a master at poking fun at those overly verbose websites, but the message is clear. Concise writing is essential for the web. Get to the point, Cut the fluff, and let the truly important content shine through.
I'm starting to think Steve Krug is my spirit animal. So we've got our website streamlined and scannable, but how do we make sure people can actually find what they're looking for? That's where navigation comes in, right? And Krug has a lot to say about that.
He does indeed. And he kicks things off with a classic analogy, trying to find a chainsaw at Sears.
Okay, now that's an image I can relate to. I mean, who hasn't wandered around a giant department store feeling utterly lost?
It's the perfect way to think about website navigation. We're all just looking for that shiny new chainsaw, metaphorically speaking, of course,
Yeah.
and we want to find it without having to trek through every aisle in the store.
So how do we create those clear, easy-to-follow pathways on our websites? Krug lays out some essential elements, starting with persistent navigation. You know, those consistent elements that stay in the same place no matter where you are on the site?
Persistent navigation is like having a trusty map that's always there to guide you.
Mm.
You know where you are, you know where you can go, no surprises.
And just like street signs should be clear and well-placed, page names should instantly tell users where they are on the site. Krug's a big fan of those LA street signs, clear, concise, no room for misinterpretation.
Exactly. A page name like Contact Us is much more helpful than something vague like Get in Touch.
And then there are those You Are Here indicators, those little markers that show you your current location within the site. Think of it like those mall directories that have a big red dot that says You Are Here.
They're subtle, but they can make a big difference in helping users orient themselves.
And speaking of helpful little trails, let's not forget about breadcrumbs. You know those navigational links that show you the path you've taken to get to a particular page? Like Hansel and Gretel, but hopefully without the Wicked Witch at the end.
Breadcrumbs can be incredibly useful, especially on sites with a lot of content. They give you a sense of context and make it easy to backtrack if you need to.
But Krug does warn against going overboard with breadcrumbs. Too many levels or vague labels can actually make things more confusing.
He's got a point. You want your breadcrumbs to be like those little pebbles. Hansel and Gretel dropped clear, easy to follow, and not leading you astray.
And then there's Krug's love for tabs. He dedicates a whole section to analyzing Amazon's classic tab navigation, and it's fascinating to see how they evolved over time.
Amazon's early implementation of tabs was a stroke of genius. They were self-evident, hard to miss, and visually appealing. They even managed to create that sense of physical space, like you're actually browsing through different sections of a website.
But even with well-designed navigation, we can't assume that users always enter the site through the homepage and neatly follow our carefully laid out paths. Sometimes they're dropped right into the middle of the site, maybe from a search engine result or a link from another website.
It's like being dropped into the middle of a movie. You might be able to follow along, but you've missed some crucial context. That's why it's essential to provide clear navigation cues on every single page, not just the homepage.
Speaking of homepages, that chapter is a real whirlwind. Krug compares designing a homepage to the game show Beat the Clock. So much to do, so little time.
The homepage has a lot of weight on its shoulders. It needs to convey the site's identity and mission, provide clear starting points, establish credibility and trust all in a matter of seconds.
It's like that first impression you get when you walk into a store. You want to immediately understand what they're about and whether they have what you need.
Exactly. And just like a storefront needs a clear sign and an inviting entrance, your homepage needs to grab the user's attention and make them want to explore further.
But with so much competition for that precious homepage real estate, conveying the big picture clearly can be a real challenge.
It's easy to fall into the trap of trying to cram everything onto the homepage. But remember, we're designing for those scan-happy web zombies. We need to prioritize clarity and provide those clear starting points. Search, browse, featured content that guide users towards their goals.
It's a delicate balancing act, isn't it? You want to give users enough information to pique their interest, but you don't want to overwhelm them with too much detail.
Exactly. Think of it like a movie trailer. You want to give viewers a taste of what's to come without spoiling the whole plot.
So how do we strike that perfect balance? Krug suggests using taglines and welcome blurbs to succinctly convey the site's purpose. Taglines are like those catchy slogans that instantly tell you what a company is all about.
Precisely. Think Nike's Just Do It, or Apple's Think Different. A good tagline should be clear, memorable, and capture the essence of your site in just a few words.
But even with a brilliant tagline and a concise welcome blurb, we still need to show users where to start. It's like that feeling of being lost in a new city. You just need a starting point to get your bearings.
And that's where clear calls to action, prominent search bars, and intuitive navigation come into play. You want to guide users towards those key entry points, whether it's browsing categories, searching for specific content, or signing up for a newsletter.
And what about the navigation on the homepage? Should it be exactly the same as the persistent navigation that appears on every other page, or can we shake things up a bit?
It's a balancing act. You want the homepage navigation to have enough in common with the persistent navigation so that users recognize the connection. But given the unique role of the homepage, it often makes sense to adapt the navigation to better serve its specific purposes.
So we could add descriptive phrases to section names, maybe even list some key subsections, or change the orientation of the navigation to better fit the overall homepage layout.
Exactly. It's all about finding the best way to guide users without sacrificing clarity and consistency. Krug gives a great example of a website called wildfire.com, where the homepage navigation was so different from the rest of the site that it created a real disconnect for users.
Talk about confusing. It's like walking into a store where the layout changes every time you enter. You'd never be able to find anything. So we've talked about the theory of good homepage design, but let's look at a couple of real-world examples. Krug analyzes several websites in the book, pointing out both the good and the bad. What about etour.com? Do you remember that one?
Oh yeah, etour.com. They did a great job of guiding first-time visitors with that prominent "Let's Go" button. It provided a clear starting point for those who are new to the site. But
Why is always a but, isn't there? What was the catch?
well, that big "Let's Go" button was so prominent and the call to action so generic that even returning users might be tempted to click it, even though there was a more subtle "Members Enter Here" button for those who were already registered.
So maybe a slight tweak to the labeling or visual hierarchy could have improved the experience for returning users. It's those little details that can make all the difference. Okay, what about productopia.com? That one had a pretty interesting concept.
Yes. Productopia was all about providing unbiased advice on finding the best products in a given price range. A valuable service for sure. But their initial homepage design had a few issues.
Like what? Was it too cluttered? Not scannable enough?
It was a combination of things. The tagline on the right was a bit misleading, and the lengthy explanation on the left felt a bit too much like happy talk. They had the right idea, but the execution needed some work.
And that's what makes these real-world examples so valuable, right? They show us that even small tweaks to the design can have a big impact on the user experience.
Absolutely. It's all about testing and iterating, constantly refining the design based on user feedback and observation. Speaking of testing, Krug has a whole chapter dedicated to why most web design arguments are a complete waste of time.
Oh, yeah, that one's a classic. He talks about this clash between the hype culture and the craft culture in web development teams. It's like those two groups are speaking completely different languages.
You've got the hype folks who are obsessed with the latest trends and buzzwords, chasing after the next shiny object. And then you have the craft folks, the designers and developers who are actually trying to build something that works.
And sometimes it feels like those two groups are constantly at odds.
It's like they're playing a never-ending game of tug of war, each side pulling in a different direction.
And caught in the middle of all this is the poor user trying to navigate a website that's been designed by committee.
Exactly. And then there's this myth of the average user that everyone seems to be designing for. But as True points out, there's no such thing. We're all unique individuals with different needs, experiences, and ways of interacting with the web.
So how do we escape this endless cycle of design debates and create websites that truly work for real people?
By focusing on usability as common courtesy.
Common courtesy, that sounds so simple.
It is. It's about treating our users with respect, not making them jump through hoops or feel stupid. Think about it. When you're interacting with a website, you're essentially a guest in that website's digital home.
So are you saying we should be rolling out the red carpet for our users? Offering them virtual tea and biscuits?
Well, maybe not literally, but the idea is to make them feel welcome and comfortable. Guide them through the site, anticipate their needs, and avoid anything that might frustrate or confuse them.
It's like those websites that bury their contact information or bombard you with pop-up ads. It's like they're saying, we don't care about you, just give us your money.
Exactly. We need to be transparent, helpful, and mindful of our users' time and attention.
And a big part of that is making sure our websites are accessible to everyone, regardless of their abilities.
Absolutely. Krug dedicates a whole chapter to accessibility, emphasizing that it's not just about following guidelines, but about creating a truly inclusive web. He encourages you to think beyond those checklists and consider the diverse ways people interact with websites.
He talks about using clear language, providing alternative text for images, and designing for keyboard navigation.
Those are all essential considerations, and they often benefit all users, not just those with disabilities. For example, using clear language and descriptive link text not only helps people using screen readers, it also makes your site easier to understand for everyone.
And let's not forget about the importance of using cascading style sheets. CSS Crew argues that moving away from table-based layouts and embracing CSS can dramatically improve both usability and accessibility.
With CSS, we can separate content from presentation, making it much easier for screen readers to access the information in a logical order.
It's a win-win for everyone. Well, I feel like we've just scratched the surface of this usability goldmine, don't make me think. It's packed with so many practical insights and witty observations that it's impossible to cover it all in one deep dive.
You're telling me it's one of those books you can keep coming back to and always find something new.
Which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. So much has changed. But that core focus on usability, on designing for real people, Dally, that's never going to go out of style.
Right. No matter how flashy or technologically advanced websites become, if they're not usable, they're not effective. Yeah. It's like building a beautiful car that nobody can figure out how to drive.
Speaking of figuring things out, Krug is a big advocate for testing. Not those fancy, expensive lab tests, but simple, practical tests that anyone can do.
He calls it lost our lease going out of business sale usability testing. Like you're so desperate to get feedback that you'll grab anyone off the street.
I love that. It really captures the spirit of what he's talking about, making testing a regular part of the process, not some big, intimidating ordeal.
And you don't need a huge budget or a team of experts. Krug says even testing with just 1 or 2 users can uncover valuable insights.
It's like getting a fresh pair of eyes on your work, someone who hasn't been staring at it for hours and can see things you might have missed.
Exactly, and that feedback can be invaluable. It can help you identify those areas where you're making users think too much, those little stumbling blocks that might be preventing them from having a smooth, enjoyable experience.
Yeah. And ultimately, that's what it's all about, right? Making sure our websites are easy to use and enjoyable to interact with. Krug talks about this idea of usability as common courtesy, and that really resonated with me.
It's such a powerful concept. It shifts the focus away from design trends and technical jargon and reminds us that we're designing for real people.
Yeah.
People who are busy, distracted, and just want to get things done.
And as designers, we have a responsibility to treat those people with respect, to make their lives easier, not harder, to help them find what they're looking for, to make them feel welcome and valued.
Exactly. And that's why this book is so valuable. It's not just a collection of tips and tricks. It's a philosophy of design. It's about putting the user at the center of everything we do.
So if you're listening to this and you're serious about creating websites that people actually enjoy using, do yourself a favor and pick up a copy of Don't Make Me Think. You won't regret it. And while you're pondering all those brilliant insights from Steve Krug, I'll leave you with this thought-provoking question. If websites are designed for scanning, is there a point where design becomes too minimal? How can you balance visual simplicity with clear communication? Something to chew on.
That's a great question. There's definitely a sweet spot there. You want your designs to be visually appealing and easy on the eyes, but not at the expense of clarity and functionality.
Exactly. It's all about finding that perfect balance. Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure diving into the world of usability with you.
The pleasure was all mine. Until next time, happy designing.